which really pushes Anand to the deep end. Him losing it has been my favorite part of this book. It's fun. It's funny. Hello everyone, my name is Nadia Lee Owens, and if you're new, welcome to Bi Black and Bookish, a booktube channel where a bi black girl who reads too much took like 6 months to finish reading Children of Bone. I honestly can't tell you what happened while I was reading this. I got pretty far pretty quickly the first time, and then I just stopped, and it was like left on my table in the living room for months until just recently I picked it back up again, and then I finished it in like 3 days. I feel like Children of Blood and Bone has been pretty popular in the bookish scene lately. It won Best Debut Author and was nominated for Best Young Adult Fantasy and Science Fiction in 2018. And I remember when I was talking to my little writing group about it, and most of them seemed to either have already read it or at least heard of it. And it even has like a movie deal apparently, which I'm pretty excited for. So it's safe to say it's a pretty popular book. And for once, I feel like I'm not years behind on the trend, even though now that I think about it, 2018 was like 5 years ago. Before we get into the summary, I just want to put a quick disclaimer that I have zero clue how to pronounce most of these names. I did look up how to pronounce them, but as I'm sure you guys have picked up by now, I do have a slight speech impediment, so I fuck up a lot of words. But just know I'm trying my best out here. So the way Children of Blood and Bone is structured is that each chapter is told in the first point of view of three main characters. And the first chapter is from the perspective of our main protagonist, Zele. Zele is a young diviner marked by her light hair and eyes who lives in a fishing village with her father and older brother. With other diviners, she secretly trains to fight under the guidance of Mama Agba. In Arisha, diviners are hated because they can become what they fear, magi, something that was once viewed as a gift from the gods, but that gift has seemingly been taken away because diviners can no longer become magi. And when Zele was young, there was a raid ordered by King Saran that massacred her mother and other magi. And if you were a child watching Nickelodeon between 2003 and 2005 and 2008, you may be thinking to yourself, this sounds very familiar. And that's because it is. The author herself, Miss Tomi Ademe, said that she was heavily influenced by one of the best animated shows of all time, and that is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Nothing can beat it. Zele is clearly our Qatar-inspired character and also a little Korra-inspired. But we'll get into that a little bit later. And King Sauron is Mark Hamill, Lord Ozai. Because of diviner hatred, diviners had to pay taxes, and those taxes were raised, causing Zele's family unable to pay them. So Zele and her brother Zane, who's our Sokka character, leaves their sickly father behind in order to try to get money in Lagos, perhaps. Who knows? We are now introduced to Amari, our protagonist. She's the outcast daughter of the king. She is constantly getting shit from her mother, ignored by her father, and compared to her seemingly perfect brother. It's also implied here that this West African-inspired country, possibly untouched by white supremacy, still suffers from colorism. Samara, mother's voice breaks into my thoughts, pulling my focus back. Have I mentioned how regal you look today? I bite my tongue and drain the rest of my tea. Though mother says regal, the word lighter hides behind her lips. Like the regal Olois who can proudly trace their lineage back to the royal families who first wore Arisha's crown. So it does seem like more of a concern with higher class citizens rather than just your normal citizen. And that does kind of reflect on the social and economic class structures of throughout the African diaspora. Kind of like the idea like the lighter, the better you are, which is a bunch of bullshit. But like I implied before, we know that the reason behind preference for lighter skin in the real world is a byproduct of white supremacy. So it'll be interesting to know the reason. And Arisha, they did mention like, oh, based on the people who wore the crown previously, but I guess I just assumed that Amari also has that lineage, but it is implied that she is like a bit darker than her mother. So I don't know. And unlike other characters, I found it a bit harder to compare Amari to even just two Avatar characters because as the series progresses, I feel as if is the character that changes the most and kind of the most dramatically as well. But for now, I'm going to say that she reminds me of Yue, Princess Yue, and the pre-banishment Zuko. Amari's only friend is her diviner maid, Amani. Well, maybe friend isn't the best word because there's that kind of like power play going on, but it is the closest to a friend that Amari seems to have. Amani is summoned by the king and Amari follows. Amari learns that some diviners have been displaying powers after coming in contact with some items, a scroll and a sunstone. Sauron tests the scroll on Amani, and after it's proven true, he kills the maid right then and there. Back to Zayway and Zane, they are in Lagos, the capital of Aricha, which is surrounded by slums where primarily diviners live. They are there selling some fish that they caught, and Zayway manages to do so, and they almost leave without incident, but then a girl begs Zayway for help to hide from the guards. They are chased through the city by the guard and their captain, but Zayway, Zane, and the girl escape. The girl is, of course, Amari, and at first I really didn't like her because of this moment. I thought it was messed up that Amari would choose a diviner, someone she knows is very vulnerable to unfair treatment by the guards, which are essentially the police. So I don't know why she's putting Zayway's already fragile safety endangered for the sake of helping her. Like, I get it, she's doing it for in the memory of her diviner friend, but I still think it's a little messed up. The chapter after this is told from the perspective of our protagonist, who's also kind of our antagonist, Anan, Amari's older brother, the guard captain, and the crown prince of Arisha. Anan is obviously a Zuko-inspired character, but I will also say with a touch of Azula. And it is important to note that before Zayway, Anan, and Amari, who I'll be calling the OG trio from now on for the sake of time, before the trio is able to escape, Anan and Zayway seem to share like a moment of connection. And when I first read this, I like groaned internally a little bit because I thought I somehow found myself reading another Raylo-esque fiction. And but then as it turns out, it's obviously supposed to be Zutara inspired, which is a slight improvement, but still sucks for me because I am so sorry to all my Zutara curlies out there, but I don't like them. I actually really hate Zutara as a ship. I just don't get it. Anyway, Anan reports his failure to his parents of not capturing the thief. In private, Saran tells Anan that the thief is Amari, and if he manages to capture her without anyone knowing her identity, Anan wouldn't have to kill his sister. And Saran's just so classy for that. Like, as the great father that I am, I'm going to let you have like a slight chance of not having to kill your sister. Dad of the year. Halfway back to their town of Olaren, Zayway and Zane find out that the girl is the Princess Amari. And this, of course, doesn't go that well. But then Amari reveals that she stole the scroll artifact. So for the sake of the scroll, Amari stays with them. Still, Zayway resents the hell out of Amari, and arguably for good reason, but I still started hoping that maybe they'll become like besties. I thought it would be really cute. And then the second book happened, so that kind of ruined it for me. Meanwhile, there is clearly the romantic potential between Amari and Zayn. The trio present the scroll to Mama Agba, who's actually a seer magi that hid her status to survive. Agba sees into the future, sees the three of them climbing a mountain, and says together that they will restore magic in Arisha. Before they set off for their adventure, Anan and his guards attack the village. The guards set the whole town aflame, but the trio, Mama Agba and Baba, manage to escape. Zewe and Zayn say goodbye to their Baba before they leave to fulfill their destiny by finding the magical temple of Shandomble. I am 80% sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. Back in the village, Anan interrogates the captured villagers and is startled to realize that he can read their minds. Meanwhile, the trio stops for the night, and in her sleep, Zewe has a dream of Anan and figures out he has some sort of magic powers himself. When I read this, it really seemed like another Raylo-esque scene, but there was something about it that reminded me of like early Edward and Bella, you know, when Edward wanted to brutally murder Bella. Is it because Anan has mind reading powers? Maybe. The next morning, the trio heads over to the closest town for supplies. Amari agrees to sell her dress for money, and in the middle of changing, Zewe accidentally sees a huge scar on her back from training with her brother. Amari also gives up her jeweled headdress for extra coin. Now knowing her a little better and impressed by her sacrifice, Zewe seems to start to like Amari at least a little bit. Not so much. She's still kind of a bitch to her a lot of the time. Anan, hot on their trail, has gone a bit mad with worry that someone would find out there is something wrong with him. So he is now set on killing Zewe and magic. And for a brief moment, it reminded me of BBC's Merlin. And if you know me, you know I'm still waiting for 6th season or even just one more episode where Arthur and Merlin reunite. And that could be a villain, not villain, but an episode all within itself. Not an episode, but a video. I should do a video about Merlin. About one of my early hyperfixations. Anyway, after climbing countless mountains, the trio finally finds Shandombo. I said it completely different than I said it the first time. What the fuck? Shandombo. Once flourishing city/temple before the war on magic. While looking around to see the culture that her father has destroyed, Amari really starts struggling with like her white guilt, or at least in this case, non-magi guilt. The three of them find a secret chamber and immediately set off a trap. Meanwhile, Anan arrives in the same town the trio bought their tools from and goes to question the same merchant they sold their dress and headdress to. Anan finds Amari's things and threatens the merchant to find out where the trio were heading. Anan knows he must kill the merchant, but he hesitates. Instead, Kaya, his father's right-hand woman and known secret lover, does it for him. The trio wakes up disarmed and tied up by a centauro, the last one. His name is Olom Lekin, or just Lekin for short, and is implied to be queer from his memories that we see later on. Lekin tells the trio about the origin of the Magi and how Saran coordinated his attack by stopping the ritual that creates magic through the connection via the Sky Mother. To bring back magic, Zewe becomes a full-fledged magi, and they must find a stone and get to the sacred temple in 1 month. When Zewe is weak and still recovering from the ritual, Anan and his soldiers attack. The OG trio plus Lekin try to escape through a broken down bridge, but only the trio makes it past. Lekin is killed by Kea and the bridge collapses. And just like that, our one and only queer character so far is dead. The trio makes it through the desert to Abeji, where the sunstone is supposed to be. The laborers there tell them how they fight in an arena for the jewel that grants eternal life. The trio watches the battle. It is a battle of ships that uses cannons to blast each other up. Each battle seems to end with everyone dead. That night, they try to steal the stone but fail. Instead, they form a plan to join the games using Zeiwei's magic as a secret weapon. Anon is now learning to embrace his magic a little as a tool to destroy it, but he's still gradually becoming a bit more empathetic. And unlike other tragic villains, I actually kind of find myself liking him a little bit. Like in page 210, if I can find it. I lift my torch to the gods and goddesses, to the magi who dance at their feet. It's imposing, invading. It unravels everything I've been taught to think. Growing up, Father led me to believe that those who clung to the myth of gods were weak. They relied on beings they could never see, dedicating their lives to faceless entities. I chose to place my faith in the throne, in Father, Orisha. But now, staring at the gods, I can't even bring myself to speak. I marvel at the oceans and forests that spring from their touch, at the world of Orisha created by their hand. A strange joy seems to breathe within the layers of paint, filling Orisha with a light I didn't know it could hold. He's really starting to make that progress from like season 1 Zuko to season 2. Anyway, Anon creates another connection with Zeiwei and they have another moment. How in the sky's name did you do that? I asked. There's a beauty to this new world I cannot deny. It makes my entire body buzz as if I've summoned a whole bottle of rum, but the girl pays me no mind. Instead, she shimmies out of her draped pants. With a shout, she leaps from the cliff and hits the water with a splash. Now tell me why this girl is comfortable with stripping in front of a man who's been trying to kill her for the last few days. It doesn't make sense. This is just why I really don't like enemies to lovers. The progression feels weird and they just don't really spend enough time to explain why they feel connected. And here it just happened, like upon their first meeting. And I'm like, why? But why? Tell me why. But because of their conversation, Anon is able to figure out that the trio is in Abeji, and once he leaves the dream world, he is discovered by Kea. In a panic, Anon uses his magic to kill her, which really pushes Anon to the deep end. Him losing it has been my favorite part of this book. It's fun. It's funny. The trio enter the game, but to their surprise, there are way more enemy ships than they saw the previous day. Still, they tell their crew like a Braveheart-like speech and rile them to fight. They are doing well at first with Zeiwei's magic, but then their boat starts sinking, and so Zeiwei uses blood magic and to save them, but it weakens her. Zane saves Zeiwei from nearly drowning, and then Amari turns around and kills a captain and also to save Zeiwei, and that gets them the win. Amari proves herself to be a capable warrior and is starting to remind me a bit of like season 3 Zuko, and they finally have the Sunstone. Another thing about Amari I feel is important to point out is that whenever she mentions Binta, her maid friend that got killed, and she mentions her a lot, which is fair enough because that is the inciting incident for Amari. But whenever Amari mentions Binta, there is something about the way she talks about her that makes it feel as if they're slightly more than friends. I don't know. Maybe I'm just imagining things. Maybe I just wanted more queer representation than a character that got killed after like 30 pages of getting introduced. But who knows? The trio heads off to the sacred temple. They make it past the desert and are back into the jungle, more relaxed now that they have everything and everything seems to be going smooth sailing. And the three of them are starting to feel like an actual team, and it's really cute. but they're a little too happy, aren't they? So a deranged Anon shows up and attacks them, and all I could imagine while reading this is Azula's infamous breakdown and the finale. Anon and Azula, not Anon and Azula, Anon and Zayway get into a death match, and while they are busy fighting, their siblings get kidnapped by masked people who are also looking for the stone. So the two of them agree to stop fighting and work together to save their siblings. Together, Zayway and Anon start to form a plan, but Anon doubts Zayway's abilities and insists on calling the guards. They get into an argument about Arisha and magic and Saran until Anon is finally made to understand Zayway's pain through his own empathy magic. He's an empath. Now understanding Zayway a bit more, Anon agrees to not stop Zayway in her mission, which I thought was a really sudden change. There is no way you can dismantle a lifetime of indoctrination. But it also just shows that Anon is a pretty empathetic guy, with or without his powers. Also, there's no way Saran is in the right. He is clearly the one who's 100% wrong in all of this. But I do like how when Anon argues for him, it almost sounds logical a little bit. It really reminds me of how the alt-right pipeline works. They'll make it a somewhat logical argument like a child should be raised in a healthy household and slowly build up to their insane and dangerous ideology like we should get rid of gay people. Meanwhile, Amari and Zane are trying to convince their captors that they are on a mission to save magic, but they are not believed, so their captors torture Zane to get Amari to tell the truth. And despite being tortured, Zane is such a good boy. Zane, I ask. He clenches his teeth and presses against the tree roots. The bloodstains spread on his pants leg. He blinks slowly, though his eyes are nearly swollen shut. You okay? The most painful tears yet prick at my eyes. Beaten, stabbed, yet still, he asks about me. Such a good boy. I love him. Zayway and Anon attack the camp and is close to losing to a fire wielder magi, but is stopped by a young healer girl, the first to touch the scroll since its resurgence, Zu. Zu apologizes for what they've done, but the OG trio cannot judge them for protecting their people. But Zane is not happy about Anon being with them now, and even less happy when he comes across Zayway and Anon about to kiss. There is a celebration to honor their mission where diviners would touch the scroll and become a magi, but now Zayway is a little hesitant after seeing what damage magic can do. The celebration continues, and during it, Zayway and Anon find a moment alone. Anon proposes to Zayway to go to Lagos with him after everything is over and build a better Orisha together. Zayway accepts and they kiss, which Zane sees. Upset over this, Zane begins to leave, but I refuse to believe that my good Sokka-coded boy would ever do that. But just when Zane is about to leave, the king's guards attack, killing Zu and other innocent diviners, though some were able to escape thanks to the same fire wielder that attacked Zayway. Zayway is captured and wakes up in the captivity of the royal guards. Anon tries to convince Zayway to give up the scroll, but then the king barges in. Saran has maggot burnt into Zayway's back that temporarily cuts her off from her magic. And while this is happening, Anon is reflecting on his duty as a prince, captain of the guards, and his love for Zayway. How duty isn't enough when it means destroying the girl he loves. And I'm like, that's a weird confession to make when you just stopped trying to kill the girl you love yesterday and she's still getting tortured by your daddy. So I stopped liking Anon. At the same time, Zane and Amari gather diviners, some now magi, from touching the scroll and attack the guard's base where Zayway is held. Anon gives Zayway over and says he will try to protect them from the inside. Afterwards, Zayway and Anon meet in the dream world once again and do the devil's tango, which does raise the question if that counts as sex or not, or just like a hyper realistic wet dream. The trio and their new Magi crew go to Gimeta to get a ship to take them to the Holy Island. The ship is led by Rowan, our token white guy that they have briefly met at the diviner settlement. On their way to the island, Zayway and Amari have a moment where they finally seem to truly understand each other and bond over their like similar trauma, and they seem to be like actually good friends, and I thought it was so cute. I just hope that it's not like destroyed in the sequel. Once there, they find Zayway and Zane's dad held hostage. Zayway gives up, not willing to lose anyone else, but he gets killed anyway. In her grief, Zayway gets her magic back and rampages, destroying the scroll in the process, tricked by Anon. For a brief moment, Anon gets his father's approval, but then he uses magic to save him. So in return, Saran tries to kill him. Amari saves her brother by killing her father. Zayway finds a new way to connect to the Sky Mother through her ancestors and brings back magic to Arisha. And that's the end of Children of Blood and Bone. At first I gave it a 4.5 out of 5, but now upon reflection, I would have to give it a 4 out of 5. I found the world and magic system fun, and though not all that groundbreaking, and while I liked the main characters for the most part, I can't tell you who's my favorite because they were like constantly falling in and out of my favor. My favorite relationship was between Amari and Zayway, but as far as romantic relationships are concerned, I couldn't stand either of them. But if I had to choose, I guess I'll choose Amari and Zane, though it was pretty undeveloped. It was very much to the back burner of Zayway and Anon, which also felt very underdeveloped. I don't know why they would have liked each other outside of just mutual attraction, which is fine. If you're just attracted to someone, just say you're attracted to them. Don't suddenly proclaim your undying love for them. I think that's the main problems with enemies to lovers. What the girlies won't is like a sexy erotica, but they're just so convinced that it has to be romantic in order to justify the sexy bits in there. And I'm like, that's not necessary. Sometimes if you just want to fuck, just fuck. Still, I was pretty excited to read the second book, Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which I have somewhere. Let me find it. Here it is. So I was pretty excited to read it until I did, which is a bit of an exaggeration. It's not that bad. It was okay. But I wouldn't say it was as good as the first one. My main problem was that the trio that I did feel as if it was the best part of the first book kind of immediately fell apart. Amari is trying to prove that she could be like an effective queen to the Magi despite who her family is, but then she kind of loses it a little, really entering her own Azula arc. Zayway is dealing with yet another loss and pressure of being a leader, yet still wanting vengeance. And this is when she starts reminding me a bit of Korra, specifically Korra in the last two seasons. And then Zane is just there. He doesn't really have an important role in the second book other than being Zayway's brother and Amari's love interest. But then again, I did genuinely think he was going to die in the first book, so I guess that's better than being dead. Meanwhile, Anon is kind of going through the same character arc as he went through in the first book, so he's just feels a little whiny and boring now. I ended up giving Children of Virtue and Vengeance a 3 out of 5. I'm still going to read the third book when that comes out. Hopefully it'll have a strong ending. The second installment of any kind of series is usually not the best except for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2. So I'm not holding it against Miss Ademe. Well, let me know what you think about the Legacy of Orisha series in the comments below, or talk to me on Twitter or Instagram at Lee Owens. Hope to see you next time, where I may or may not play a visual novel or do my March write-up wrap up. It depends on my depression. So until then, bye.